Hopefully everyone can see that. Great. Okay, again, thanks for everyone for being here. We're going to get started. Again, this is the Local Government Grant Program webinar for 2026. I'm Jennifer Dimshow. I am the Local Government Grant Program Coordinator. With us, we have Michelle Scalise, our Grants and Community Programs Manager, and Jody Belfi, our Recreation Grants Team Lead and our RTP Coordinator. I am going to go stop my video so that I don't block out any part of the slides. So anytime during the presentation, please use the Q&A box if you have questions, and Michelle or Jody may stop me during the presentation to answer these, or we might catch them at the end for Q&A. This presentation is recorded. We will post the slides on our website, and I will have links at the end of the presentation to our website. I also plan on emailing all registrants the link to our YouTube page where the recording will be. That might take about a week after the webinar is completed. So a little bit into the agenda for today, we're going to look at the history of the LGGP program, the Local Government Grant Program. We're going to talk about the funding availability for 2026. We'll talk about eligibility, the matching requirements for the program, the different project types we have for the program. We will get into how we score the applicants. We'll talk about required attachments. We'll dig into the online application instructions and talk about the LGGP Advisory Committee. And then lastly, if you're so lucky to get a grant, we'll talk about your responsibilities as a grantee. So this program has been around since 2000. And since then, we've awarded over 100 million across the state to local government outdoor projects. You can see on this map, it's a widely utilized program. This is not the only grant program that OPRD offers. There's 4 other programs listed here. There's 2 federal programs, an ATV program, and the County Opportunity Grant Program. These different programs might be better suited towards your specific needs, and so I recommend that you check out our website and dig into these programs to see if they're better suited for you. And then here's a little plug for our partners at the National Park Service. They offer a planning assistance program called the RTCA for short, Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program. So this is for your project if you are still in the early stages. So if you need to do some concept planning, maybe you need to do some outreach with stakeholders or do some inventorying or assessment or other planning, check out this program. It's an open grant cycle, so you can apply at any time of the year. And there's a link here if you're interested in that. Okay, so digging into LGGP. So in 1998, voters passed a ballot measure, and that ballot measure dedicated 7.5% of state lottery proceeds to OPRD. Of that 7.5%, 12% was then dedicated to this specific grant program. Later in 2010, voters passed another ballot measure that would trigger an increase from 12% to 25% of OPRD's share being dedicated to the local government grant program. And that was only if the state lottery proceeds exceeded 150% of funds transferred in that biennium. And you'll see on this next slide that trigger did occur. So over the years, the grant program funding had been around 14 million. So in 2022, it was 14 mil. In 2023, the same. And then in 2024, you could see a big bump, over double. And that was because of that increase to 25% trigger. You can also see this year we've got 17 million to award. And on average, over the last few years, we've received between 50 to 80, just under 80 applications per year. So for 2026, as I mentioned, there's around 17 million available for funding. It might be a little bit more but that's just an estimate for now. Of that 17 million, 80% will be dedicated to our large grant program, so a majority of our funds go there. And we'll talk about what these different grant types are as we dig into the presentation. The other 20% will be dedicated to our small grants, so just over 3 million, and then 300,000 will be dedicated to our planning grant program. So our planning grants, the maximum award for those is 50,000. And last cycle in 2025, the average award was 45,000. So people use most of the maximum award every year for that one. Our small grant maximum award is 100,000. And the average award in 2025 last cycle was 85,000. Our large grant maximum request is 1 million. And the average award for that last cycle was 714,000. And then for our acquisition grant program, the maximum award is also 1 million. And the typical range for that is 500 to a million. The LGGP program is a reimbursement grant. So that means that as a grantee, you will initially pay all of your project expenses, except for land acquisitions. Those are a little bit different. But you will submit your full accounting of project expenses and payment requests, and then request reimbursement for the state's percentage of the project. Reimbursements don't have to wait until the end of the project. You can request reimbursement as costs are incurred, but no more than quarterly. So you can wait until the end if it's a smaller project, or you can request them quarterly if you're needing that cash flow. Eligible applicants, as the name of the grant program entails, local government agencies are eligible applicants, and so that includes cities, counties, parks and rec districts, port districts, and metro. And the matching requirements for this program, it's a tiered matching program. So the greater your population, the higher percentage match you have. So there's the highest match percentage if your city or district has a population greater than 25,000, or if you're a county with a population greater than 50,000. That match goes down if you're a city or district with a population between 5,000 and 25,000. Only a 40% match is required. Or if you have a county with a population between 30 and 50,000. And then our lowest match requirement, 20%, if you have a city or a district with a population under 5,000 or a county with a population under 30,000. And just one note here, if you are a Parks and Rec district, you do have to provide the population of your service district as part of your application so we can determine your matching requirement. So eligible match, this program has pretty generous options in terms of what you can use to match your projects. So the first eligible match is the most obvious one. It's your local agency budgeted funds. So we call that cash match. You can also dedicate your local agency's labor and equipment. And so the photo on the right, this is a public works crew pouring a concrete pad for a shelter. So that labor and equipment can be tracked and use as your match. You can also dedicate your agency's materials and supplies. So if you've got lumber, if you've got concrete, you've got rebar, you can use that, calculate that, and use that towards your match. We also allow other grants to be used as a match. So other federal grants, other state grants, private grants, foundation grants, all can be used as match requirement. We also allow private donations and volunteer labor to be used as match, and we'll talk about those on the next few slides here. So the value of land can also be used as a match if it's been acquired within the past 6 years and it's supported by a recent appraisal. So you can calculate that and use it towards your matching requirement. This program also allows pre-agreement costs to be used as match. And so pre-agreement costs are costs that you've incurred prior to your grant agreement, as long as those costs were within the past 2 years of application. And so typically for pre-agreement costs, we see things like design, engineering, planning, your permit costs, environmental studies, surveys, and even appraisals can be used as a pre-agreement matching cost. Pre-agreement costs can't exceed 15% of the total cost of the project, and they also have to be identified in the budget. So with your grant application, if you want to utilize pre-agreement costs, they need to be identified. We allow for donations to be used as a match, as I mentioned. And so for volunteer labor, the time of a person donating services as a volunteer would be valued at the rate paid as a general laborer. If the volunteer is a professionally skilled in performing the project, so for example, if you have a mason who's doing brickwork on the project, or if you have a landscape architect who is helping with the design of the project, and they want to donate that labor pro bono, then the wage rate that that individual is normally paid for their skilled labor can be charged to the project. And we would require documentation either in the form of timesheets or invoices to document that donated labor. Donated materials. So if you have a lumber company that has offered to donate a pallet of wood towards your project, you can claim that value as long as the value is reasonable and doesn't exceed current fair market prices for your estimation. The same goes with donated equipment. We can use the hourly rate for donated equipment on a project as long as it doesn't exceed fair market rental value. So this might be a good place to stop before we go into the different types of projects that LGGP funds. I know it's early in the presentation, but if there are any questions that Jody or Michelle have been fielding.
No questions yet. So
Okay.
definitely use the Q&A if they come to mind throughout the presentation, folks.
Okay, great. This is the more fun part anyway. Okay, so what is LGGP fund? So there's 4 different project types we'll talk about. The first one is acquisition. The next one is development. That's kind of the most common type of project we see. LGGP will fund rehab projects. And then we have the small community planning program as well. And just a couple notes here, only public outdoor parks and recreation facilities are eligible, keyword being outdoor. And areas and facilities that are funded by LGGP must be open and accessible to the public at large. And we'll talk about some ineligible projects and what that means later. So for acquisitions, acquisitions can include land and water for public recreation areas and facilities, including property for new parks, additions to existing parks, or acquisitions for trails or open spaces. Acquisitions require an appraisal to establish the value, and in most cases, that appraisal will conform to the USPAP or Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. In rarer cases, if there's federal money being used, you might have a yellow book appraisal. We will also accept those as part of an acquisition application. Once you've initiated an appraisal, it has to be reviewed by a qualified appraisal reviewer, also known as a desk appraisal. And initiating both the appraisal and the appraisal review are the responsibility of you as the applicant. And these are both due at the time of application deadline. You can include your appraisal costs as part of your match, as I mentioned. And in some cases, if the acquisition is a small piece of property and you believe that that value of property is under $25,000, we may accept a waiver valuation in lieu of a full-blown appraisal. The person performing the waiver valuation has to have sufficient understanding of the local real estate market to be qualified to make that valuation, but it doesn't have to be a full-blown appraiser. So we recognize in some cases there might be an acquisition opportunity that might be lost due to the timing. So our grant cycle doesn't always align with when property goes up for sale. So in that case, we recommend getting a waiver of retroactivity. So if you request a waiver of retroactivity prior to your acquisition and it's approved, that allows you to then apply for an acquisition application after you've already acquired the property. This waiver of retroactivity in no way guarantees your success with the grant, but it does allow you to apply. So talk to us if you have this circumstance. We also recognize that you might be purchasing some pre-existing structures on the property that you're acquiring. And as part of your application, you have to list all of those structures and their intended use for outdoor recreation or disposition. So if there's a house on the property, how are you going to use that for outdoor recreation once you've acquired it? So for interim uses, once you've acquired the property with LGGP funding, that property has to be open to the public for some form of recreational use. We expect that development of that property into recreational use should take place within 2 years of your acquisition. Maybe you're phasing it. Maybe you're not developing the full-blown sports complex that you want to build, but you're developing it in phases, and we expect to see some type of development within 2 years. So moving on from acquisitions to development. So as I mentioned, this is where a majority of our grant funds are awarded. Development projects create new outdoor recreation facilities in accordance with our statewide comprehensive outdoor plan. SCORP for short, we'll talk about that in depth as we get into our scoring criteria later. Maybe the outdoor facilities incorporated into your comprehensive plan, your local comprehensive plan, or maybe you have a parks master plan that identifies that development project. Or maybe you've conducted some other type of local planning effort to determine what development project needs funding. So we fund all types of outdoor recreation facilities. I'm not going to read through this list here, but it's a very wide-ranging list, everything from sport courts to playgrounds to shelters and splash pads, anything related to camping or spectator facilities, skate parks, swimming facilities, all types of outdoor recreation facilities are funded with this program. We also fund support facilities related to those other projects. So things like roads, parking lots, restroom buildings, kiosks, interpretive signage, lighting, walkways, and landscaping are all fundable projects with this program. Ownership or control of the property. So if you're developing a facility with this program, that property has to be either owned in fee simple by you, the applicant, with a deed, or that development project could be located on leased land or land with an easement that provides control of the property for a minimum of 25 years. And we'll talk about that in a little bit later in more depth, but that's a requirement of the program. That 25 years time frame is important. Rehabilitation projects. So major rehab means the repair, restoration, or reconstruction of existing facilities. And here are some examples of reasons why a project might need major rehab. So the first one is maybe that project doesn't meet access requirements with ADA. Maybe the facility is beyond its normal life expectancy or obsolete. Tennis courts with cracks in them that cause trip hazards might be a good reason for major rehab. Major rehab projects can also be needed because they were destroyed by a fire, natural disaster, or vandalism. Or maybe the project doesn't currently meet health and safety or building code requirements. And then lastly, maybe there's changing recreational needs of your community, and you need to see a different type of facility developed as part of this project. These are just examples. There might be other reasons for major rehab listed. Maybe you're trying to meet some universal design guideline requirements, or you have another reason. But notably, lack of maintenance is not a reason for a rehab project. So some ineligible projects. As I mentioned, these projects have to be outdoor facilities, so indoor facilities are not eligible projects. They're great projects like community centers, swimming pools, meeting rooms, maintenance buildings, and equipment, but we will not fund them with LGGP. Routine maintenance and repair, like cleanup, painting, minor repairs of buildings, structures, and equipment, or utilities for maintaining other facilities, are not fundable projects with LGGP. Professional areas designed for semi-professional or professional arts or athletics. So, for example, we won't fund professional type outdoor theaters, rodeo arenas, or intercollegiate or interscholastic sports facilities are not fundable. We won't fund exhibit areas for entertainment or non-recreational purposes. So for academic purposes, economic purposes, it has to be for recreational purposes. We also won't fund exclusive use areas that are only open to one particular group or organization. So it has to be open to the public at large. Acquisition of historic sites that are to be used for museums or primarily archaeological excavations are not fundable, and also acquisitions of land to be used primarily for indoor facilities are not fundable with the acquisition program. And moving on to our last project type, the planning projects, small community recreation planning. So eligible applicants include cities and districts with a population less than 10,000 or counties with populations less than 50,000 are eligible for this. The project types that we'll fund include system-wide park plans. So if you need a parks master plan for your full city, this is a great type of project that we'll fund with this program. Or maybe you need a site-specific park plan. You've got a park, there's some good ideas about what needs to go in that park, but you don't have a concept plan. This program is a great source for that. We'll also fund community or regional trail system plans. This program is not intended for funding construction documents or engineered plans. It's meant for concept planning, it's meant for public involvement, it's meant for things like a 30% concept plan, but not 100% construction documents. The maximum award is 50,000. And just like our other program, we have a tiered matching system. And so we have a 20% match required for cities and districts with a population less than 5,000 or counties with a population less than 30,000. And that match requirement doubles if you're a city or district with a population between 5 and 10,000 or a county with a population between 30 and 50,000. So planning projects generally utilize consultants to work with the citizens and agencies to develop the plan. And these projects are required to include substantial public participation. It's a planning document. You should involve the public. And the goal of this planning program is to have a master plan that will guide your future park or trail development. Okay, and before we jump into our scoring criteria, maybe we'll take a brief minute to see if there are questions that we should answer.
Yeah, there is one question about interpretation. I think this maybe came from the slide about ineligible areas, and wanting to understand the difference between an ineligible interpretation area and eligible interpretation information like kiosks and signage that we do see and do fund like that. So I don't know if that makes, if you need any more information.
I might need to refer to
Um,
the slide on the
okay.
ineligible to determine what is
Yeah.
meant by interpretation area.
Yeah, so we do fund plenty of interpretive signage and things like that in parks with our programs. So maybe if there's a specific question about what you're planning in Eugene, you can contact Jenny. Um, okay, we've got more questions coming in. Um, do, 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 do you see an increase level of a large grant awarded for cities who have done the planning grant process first? Um,
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
great question. I think
Hmm.
that'll be a little bit clear when we go into the
Hmm.
scoring criteria, which is our
Yeah.
next topic here.
Hmm.
We have a pretty clear scoring rubric. And
Hmm.
so I think you might find that the scoring rubric kind of
Hmm.
addresses that question.
Yeah.
If you've got a good plan in place, you're more
Hmm.
likely to get some eligible points just for project readiness.
Yeah, yeah. And we do expect, as local governments that you have the level of planning done that's needed in your community. And the planning grants more for those smaller communities that have some different requirements or resources available. Installing new playground equipment in an existing park, would that be a development project, Jenny?
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
thank you. Okay. Let me start clearing some of these out. How recent does the appraisal need to be for a land acquisition?
Within a year.
Okay.
And you could talk to us if you have
Mhm.
more specific questions about timeline.
Yeah, great. What if you have a ball field facility that is open to the public for reservation most of the year, but for a few months of the year has an exclusive use for one team? And is that still eligible? And I would want to know, I think, does that mean like those months there's no time available for the public and it's the entire months um that are off limit, or if it's
Yeah, we
just
may
those
want to see
months are
your
generally
exclusive.
busier. Yeah, maybe just send a
Mm.
schedule to Jenny
Yeah,
would help. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, and then how long does a waiver of retroactivity last?
I think I'm going to field that to Michelle.
Yeah. Michelle, let me know if you want
Sorry,
me to
having a
repeat
little
it.
bit of
Yep.
trouble with
No.
my turning off my mute. So that the waiver of retroactivity
Mhm.
is only intended to be for the very next funding cycle. So if we issue you a waiver of retroactivity, that just makes it so that you're eligible to apply in the next funding opportunity. It wouldn't be eligible for future funding opportunities. I don't know if that
Great.
answers that.
Yeah. And if you have more follow-up questions, you can pop those in the chat. Someone else is asking another acquisition question. I have an appraisal from July 2024 for a property we have an option on. Oh, I think you may have already answered this actually. Is that recent enough, provided it's reviewed prior to submitting an application? So it sounds like that be like Jenny answered before, it would have to be within a year-ish. Anything to add, Michelle or Jenny, on
Yeah,
that?
and it does say, or does it need
Hmm.
to be updated? And it would
Hmm.
likely need to be updated, but that
Hmm.
appraisal probably could still be viable with an update.
Great, thank
A-
you.
And I would just ask too, is
Hmm.
that for counting a property that you're acquiring for match, or is that to
Mm,
use the acquisition program? Because these are different.
that's a good question. Yep.
Yeah, and it's not totally
Hmm.
clear in that
Yep.
question, which is meant.
Yeah. So yeah, would be treated different. Oh, acquisition program. Yep.
Okay, okay.
Mhm. Um, this is similar to that ball field question. Does a development of a park that's open to the public for the majority of the year, but may also be used for paid events, mostly during the summer, qualify? And I think probably same answer, that we'd want to see a little more information about the schedule, just to see what that actually looks like, for public access during those summer months.
And really, we're just getting
Mhm.
at what does majority of the year mean,
Mhm.
right? Like that's
Yeah.
our main question. If these
And
events, are 13 nights in the summer
Mhm.
and that's it, that's definitely
Mhm.
majority of the year it's open to the public.
Yeah.
yeah, and generally,
Mhm.
you can charge fees. There's, you have specific questions about that,
Mhm.
but parks are allowed to charge fees.
Mhm.
Um, anyway.
I want to repeat a question that was answered to this person in the chat. They asked about acquiring a community center. And that goes back to the fact that this program is just for outdoor recreation facilities. So it would be acquisition of the outdoor facilities, and also about converting a parking lot into a plaza for that same area. And I think the answer to that is the plaza would need to have some sort of recreational function to it. And that could be something good to send to Jenny to take a look at more of the specifics of what would be developed in that plaza. Another question for rehab/development, could it be used for multiple projects or just a single one? And I would say that depends on if it's all in the same park.
Hmm.
Um,
Yep.
Yes. So
Yeah,
we've definitely funded large projects with lots of things happening in the same park. Sorry, Jenny, go ahead.
no, that's
Hmm.
exactly what I was going to
Hmm.
say. Yep. We definitely see multiple project elements
Hmm.
funded with the rehab program,
Yep, yep,
but not in disparate
yep,
parks.
not in different parks. Yeah. For the planning grant, how is matching funds usually accomplished?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Mhm.
So it's the same as the other programs. So if you have donated labor, if
Mhm.
you have local agency labor committed to the project, that can be used as matching funds. It's the same type. Maybe you're not going to have supplies and materials as part of your planning grant matching funds, but it's the same guidelines that apply.
Yeah. And then this person is asking, what's the percentage of match for a city population of 2,000, but a county population of 54,000 for a city park project? So that would
Yeah.
just be depend on who owns, is it the city or the county who owns the property?
Yeah,
Mhm.
who's
Yep.
applying for the grant?
Mhm.
Is it the city or the county? And that's
Mhm.
what we'll use for our
Yep.
population and matching requirements.
Yep. Yep. So assuming it's the city that owns that one, you'd be in the low, I believe that's the 20% category. I think that is all. If I missed anything in here, feel free to just pop it in again. Oh, got one more. Thank you. If a park master plan has been developed with future splash pad and night lighting, can the upgrade of irrigation and electrical qualify? Think
I
we
think
might
some,
need more.
yeah,
Yeah,
these
go ahead,
might be,
Michelle.
yeah, I was just going to say probably some of these
Mhm.
questions that are really specific to your
Mhm.
project, um, maybe hold off. And if we have time at the end, we can
Mhm.
get into
Yep.
those details. Otherwise, Jenny can follow up with you on specific to your project questions.
Yeah, I think that just requires more follow-up. I need a little
Yep.
bit more information there.
Yep.
Um, okay, we'll catch up at the end of this
Great.
presentation. Okay, great. So we're going to jump into some scoring criteria. You've heard this term SCORP bounced around quite a bit. That stands for State Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan. And we have a new one. So last year was the first year we used the 2025-29 SCORP. And there's a link to the full plan here. And we've also included it in our online application. You can download a PDF of the plan itself. So this is the scoring rubric we use. This is in our grant manual as well. And there's a link to our grant manual at the end of this presentation. And we're going to go through each one of these in detail. But I just wanted you to note how much of the scoring criteria is coming from the SCORP. So the top 8 there are coming straight from the SCORP priorities. So it's a really important document. I highly recommend getting familiar with it. So jumping right in. So the first SCORP criteria is consistency with statewide priorities. So up to 20 points, which is quite a bit, is awarded to this. And the first step you'll do here is identify if your project is located in a close to home area or a dispersed area. And those definitions are at the bottom. So a close to home area is any project located within an urban growth boundary or other type of unincorporated boundary. Or if you're a dispersed area, it's anything outside of that UGB, outside of the urban growth boundary. And as part of your application, you will provide a map that shows where your park project is in relation to that boundary so that we can kind of double check that you've selected the right type of priority. So once you've determined if you're just close to home or dispersed area, you will look at these different tables. Um, and I have them on the next slide here too. But I recommend either having the SCORP open with you as you're going through these so you can look at them. We've also tried to make it really easy in the online application by having drop-down menus. So you'll have a multiple choice selection, but you do need to know if you're close to home or dispersed. You can't pick both. So you've got to pick one or the other. So this is an example of what you might see in the SCORP for these tables. And what you're just looking for is that if your project is meeting any one of these priorities, you select that from your multiple choice options in the online application. So you might be selecting multiple of these if your project is hitting on multiple priorities. And so that's what our grant reviewers are looking for. The next SCORP criteria is diversity, equity, and inclusion priorities. So this one awards up to 10 points. And in the 2025-29 SCORP, it evaluated differences in recreational behaviors, priorities, motivations, and constraints for underserved populations. The report highlighted that key differences in recreation behaviors for underserved groups are likely explained by differences in constraints to recreation rather than different motivations or activity preferences. And so the intent of this criteria is to award points to applicants who demonstrate a strong commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion by lowering barriers to outdoor recreation. So this commitment can be shown by addressing at least one of the categories shown here. So the first 4 bullet points are linked to SCORP tables that are multiple choice in your application itself. So if your project meets any of these needs for these tables, you'll select them in the application. If your needs are not identified in these first 4 tables, then you'll describe how your needs have been identified through citizen involvement, like public workshops, public meetings, or surveys. So you don't need to answer this narrative response if you've got needs that are identified in these first 4 tables. And then lastly, you'll describe your organization's diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy, specifically as it relates to this project. So diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies direct organizations to address inequity in the communities you serve. This also ensures diverse representation in the planning and decision-making process and promotes well-being or welcoming environments for visitors, employees, and volunteers. So if your organization has a strategy like this, please list that here and describe how that relates to your proposed project. And then in the attachment section of the application, you might upload supporting documentation of your strategy. So these are the tables that I was referencing for the different population groups. So these will be identified as a multiple choice selection in the online application, and you'll just select which ones apply to your project. SCORP criteria for accessibility accommodation. So this is worth up to 5 points. And basically, you're looking at, will your project satisfy one or more of the needs identified in this table? And this is a table that represents statewide, our priority need is demonstrated at the statewide level for households with disabilities. So this is also another multiple choice question in the application. Accessibility compliance, just a note here, this is not a scored criteria, but it's a eligibility requirement of the program. And that's because anything that LGGP funds must be developed and designed in conformance with all state and federal regulations. So that includes the ADA, guidelines, and also state building codes. So this is something we'll look at the end of the project to make sure it's completed. We don't want to get to the end of a project for a new restroom only to discover that there's no accessible walkway from the parking lot that provides access to that restroom. So if you're altering an existing parking lot or you're building a new parking lot with your project, this is something we're going to look at the end. And so we don't want to get to that point where you're having to retroactively do some ADA compliance at the end. SCORP criteria for conservation and recreation, this is worth 5 points. And so the 25-29 SCORP noted that many places in the Oregon outdoors have seen a record number of visitation in recent years. And we should continue to promote outdoor recreation for health and economic benefits, but we also note that increased usage can lead to overcrowding and environmental degradation, potentially reducing participation. And so to be considered for this criterion, you'll explain how your project addresses crowding while also decreasing the burden on current natural resources. And for this criterion or others, if you're ever stumped how to respond, please reference the actual SCORP document. There's chapters that are broken down by each criteria, so you might get ideas for how your project is already meeting these requirements. It might just help you brainstorm how your project is meeting these and how you can incorporate priorities into your project. Okay, so local needs and benefits. This is one of my favorite SCORP criteria. It's also worth the most points, so up to 25 points are awarded for this criteria. And this one provides a lot of flexibility. So you just need to identify your project needs through one of these categories. If you address multiple of these categories, great. We want to hear about it. I think that will help you get more points. And all of these are just at, how is your project meeting a public need and how is that public need demonstrated? So you can use the public recreation provider needs identified in the SCORP. So there's tables that you can use and you'll use again, either close to home or dispersed area priorities. Or maybe your need is identified in a statewide Oregon resident survey. Again, you'll look at close to home or dispersed, not both. Or maybe it's not identified in any of those and you just have a local planning document or a parks master plan, or maybe it's both. Please talk about that in your answer. And then lastly, if it's not in a local planning document, a park master plan, or it's not identified in the SCORP, what public process determined whether or not this project is needed? So did you do a public workshop? Did you do a public meeting? Was there a city council meeting, a parks commission meeting? We just want to know the planning process that you did to determine that this project is in need. The SCORP criteria for physical activity, this is worth 5 points. This is an easy multiple choice question. Does your project satisfy one of the 5 physical activity infrastructure priorities in this table? And then the next question is your project located in one of these counties? And there's a drop-down list for that. Universal design and inclusive outdoor recreation opportunities, this is worth 10 points. And the 2529 SCORP recommends that park amenities and features be planned with universal design principles. This approach can help address barriers related to personal health and accessibility that were found to be especially prominent for low-income residents and households with disabilities. So for this criterion, we're looking for projects that exceed ADA requirements. This is not ADA, this is beyond ADA. And if you're not sure what universal design guidelines are, there's a reference document within the SCORP, and it's also linked here on this slide, and we have it uploaded on our website and in the online grant application. It's just a 2-page PDF that has a bunch of different options for universal design guidelines. Need for major rehab, this should sound familiar. Funding for facility rehab and replacement was a top issue identified within UGB and dispersed areas in the SCORP. And so it made its way into the SCORP criteria. Again, all of these reasons for major rehab are not attributed to lack of maintenance. So these are sort of the acceptable needs for major rehab that we'll consider. And as part of this criterion, we'll want to make sure we see photos in the attachment section showing the facilities that you need to rehab. And then also as part of this question, if only a portion of your project is rehab, tell us approximately what percentage of your project is rehab. So we have a couple of other scoring criteria. So the first one's community support. So up to 5 points are awarded here. This is when we'll consider your letters of support. It's best if you stick with 3 to 5 original letters of support from organizations. It's better if they're not form letters. If they're unique to the organization, they mean more. Also in this section, we'll accept survey analysis from park users, neighbors, or stakeholders to demonstrate that community support. In this section, we'll look at your financial commitment to the project. This is worth 10 points. And in this section, we're looking at, does your agency demonstrate financial commitment to the project? What is the source of your match? Is it secure? If your match is another grant, what would you do if you didn't get that grant? What's your plan B? And then lastly, we'll look at how you developed your project budget. Is it an engineer's estimate? Did you source quotes for your restroom project? We just want to get at, to what extent has enough money been budgeted to successfully complete the project? Sustainability. So this is another one where I recommend looking at the SCORP if you're stumped. So for this criteria, it's up to 5 points, and you will describe how sustainability is considered in the intent, strategies, and long-term management plans for your proposed project. And there's a lot of examples here of how you can incorporate these priorities into your project. So just talk about how you're doing that here. Readiness to proceed. So up to 5 points is awarded in this criteria. This program, LGGP, is really intended for shovel-ready projects. And so for this criteria, you should demonstrate that your project is compatible with land use requirements. And what degree is your site plan or construction plans completed? Have you already got your land use permits? What are the other permits you need for this project? Do you need any Army Corps permits, or do you need a wetland fill permit from the Department of State Lands? We want to know, and just because your project needs permits doesn't mean it's going to score low. We just want to know how you're going to complete the next steps, and is your timeline reasonable for how you're going to complete the next steps. And so as part of this criteria, if you have a project timeline, attach it in the other section of the attachments category. And also as part of the readiness to proceed, we require a LUX. So we require a land use compatibility statement from your planning department who has authority over your project. We require that you use our specific state form. And so you can see a little screen cap of that here. It's on our website and in the application. You can download it. So the planner over your jurisdiction who has authority over your project will list any land use permits that you've already received or that will be needed with the development of your project. And again, only our specific form is accepted. Okay, I think this also might be a good spot to stop for questions if we have any that we want to answer now, or we can wait till the end. We'll see if Jody or
Nothing
Michelle.
new.
Okay, perfect. So we can jump right into required attachments. So there's a long list of required attachments. Not every attachment is needed for depending on your project type, and so I've tried to summarize that on this slide. So let's go into these. So the first one is construction or concept drawings. So as I mentioned, if you've got construction documents, great, attach them. If you're just at a concept level, that's fine, attach what you have. And these are obviously only required for development or rehab projects. You're not going to have these for a planning project or an acquisition project, potentially. The next one is the environmental checklist. We'll talk about that on the next slides. The land use compatibility statement we've talked about. And then there's a series of maps that we require. We're going to talk specifically about the park boundary map, but these other maps are pretty self-explanatory. We need a vicinity map just to show, proximity to the region. Your urban growth boundary map, we talked about that, that's needed to determine your SCORP, close to home or dispersed priorities. We're going to talk specifically about the park boundary map and the project site plan. And then the last map here, that's a map that we need for the State Historic Preservation Office. We'll talk about that in later slides. Photos. So photos are great for our grant reviewers to quickly grasp your project. Photos are also great if you're doing a rehab project because it shows the facilities in need of rehab. Please combine all of your photos into one document. It's so much easier for our reviewers to review one document as opposed to 10 different photos that we have to open up and download. Resolution to apply for grant. We have a template for this, but we recognize that your jurisdiction might have their own template. Maybe your city council has a specific template for resolutions. But if you use your own, just make sure that you're incorporating all of the whereas statements that are included in our template resolution. Those things include things like the commitment to your match requirement or commitment to ongoing maintenance. So those are really important key steps that we want to see in your resolution to apply for the grant. State agency review forms. These are just required for development and rehab projects. We'll talk about those in later slides. And then the last three attachments are just required for acquisitions, and we'll talk about those in later slides as well. Okay, so this is what the online application looks like under your required attachments. You have to submit a document for each attachment type. And so if there's something that is not relevant to you or you don't have it yet, upload a document marked as not applicable, or the system will not let you save or submit the actual application. I think it'll let you save, but it won't let you submit. And like I mentioned, please combine your files when possible. It's just so much easier for our reviewers if all of your letters of support are combined and all of your photos are combined. And the A+ gold standard is if all of your photos are combined into one document and you've got captions that easily say what they are. So if you're using a Word document, it's super, super helpful for us. Okay, so the park boundary map. This is one of the most important attachments that you'll prepare and submit as part of your application. This is also something that we kick back to you to edit pretty often. Um, and I want to go through this example. We know that you may not in your jurisdiction have the mapping capacity to get to this level of detail, but this is a good example that hits all of the project elements that we want to see in a park boundary map. So at the top, you'll see there's the agency name for this project. You'll see the project name. You'll see there's a scale at the bottom, a directional arrow, and a legend. And then most importantly, in yellow, you can see the very clear park boundary map. You can also see that they've identified their project site specifically for this is a smaller portion of the park boundary map. And that's important because once LGGP dollars are spent on a project, that park boundary that park property must be dedicated to the public for recreational use for a minimum of 25 years. So it's not just the project site, it's the park boundary itself. So that could be larger than the project site. And this map that you submit as part of your application becomes the basis for a conversion process if it's discovered that your park boundary changes or that uses are no longer recreational within the park boundary. And we'll talk at the end a little bit about conversions, but this map is the basis for those. You can also see that this park boundary map included other features within the park that may not be relevant to the project site, but just help for reference, or if you're referencing them in your attachment and you want to have a map that shows where the other elements are in relation to your project, that's great. And often we might see a site plan and a park boundary map that are combined into one map. That's great. Sometimes the project map is a little bit too busy and you don't want to include your site plan on the park boundary map. That's fine too. We just want to make sure that this specific park boundary map is very clear and concise. Okay, so moving on to the environmental checklist. So all applicants are required to fill out the environmental checklist. That includes all application types and all project types. The completed checklist will then be used in submittals to state agencies for comment, which we're going to talk about on the next slide. But that's only if required by our application type. So just to reiterate, all applications will fill out an environmental checklist, but not all applications will fill out the state agency review forms. So only development and rehab projects are required to get feedback via the state agency forms. And there's 3 mandatory agencies that you have to consult with. The Department of State Lands, ODFW, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, DEQ. There may be other relevant state agencies depending on your project type. And so you'll review this contact list to see if there's any relevancy for your specific project. So an example of another state agency might be the Oregon State Marine Board. If you're dealing with a boating facility, you'll want to contact them as part of your application. As I mentioned, planning and acquisition projects are not required to receive state agency feedback forms, but you are required to fill out that environmental checklist. So here's the instructions for those state agency review forms. You'll follow these. It's on page 1 for how to send your request to these state agencies. I recommend submitting early. They have up to 30 days to respond to your project. If they don't respond within that 30 days, that's considered a no comment response. I will also note it's okay if you're still waiting on your state agency comments when you submit your application. During technical review, which we'll talk about, we can add completed forms to your application as they're received. But we would like to see that you've already contacted these agencies. We just don't want this to be a reason that you don't submit. State Historic Preservation Office. So we try to make this a little bit easier for you. OPRD will submit your project to SHPO on your behalf. And we do that before you receive grant funding, but after your application is received. So in order to assist us with contacting SHPO, we ask that you fill out 2 SHPO forms and provide a map. So the 2 forms that you'll fill out for the State Historic Preservation Office are the clearance form. So that's everything in the built environment, so everything above ground. And then we also require the submittal form, and that's everything below ground, so the archaeological assessment. And then SHPO allows multiple map types. Just make sure you submit one of these maps. They're very friendly in the types of maps that they allow. Okay, so for acquisitions, they have separate required attachments, as I mentioned. So we talked about an appraisal within the last 12 months. We will not review an acquisition application if there hasn't been an appraisal. We also want to see that appraisal review. And then lastly, we want to see, is there a proof of a willing seller? So we'll need a letter from the seller that they're willing to sell the property to you. And then these are questions that are just eligibility requirements. Will development occur within 2 years of that acquisition? We'll want to see that in your application. And then will the property be open to the public after that acquisition? And so those are questions that are asked in the application itself. Okay, so online grant application instructions. So this is a link to the LGGP website. Once you're there, if you scroll down to the green arrow, application and forms, there's a PDF link to our online grant application instructions. I highly, highly, highly recommend looking at this, especially if you're brand new to the system. There's also instructions on how to create a new account if you don't have access to the system. So this is where you'll go to get information on that. And then I just wanted to say, these have been updated for this cycle, and I would ask you to pay particular attention to the budget worksheet instructions. The online application for budget reporting match can be really finicky and confusing, and these instructions are intended to help you. So please, if you're confused, contact me for questions. I'm happy to help walk you through how to create your online grant budget. Also on this same page, underneath that application and forms header, there's 3 pre-application worksheets. So these are 3 Word documents that contain every grant question related to your project. So just pick the correct project type, and then you'll have a Word document that you can reference. So if our online system is finicky or forgets to save your work, you will not lose any of your precious narrative response. On that note, our grant system can be glitchy, and so please save your online application often. There's a save button in the top right corner. Save, save, save. I don't want you to lose your work. And the best thing you can do is use these worksheets and just copy and paste your responses over into the system. This also allows you to track word count. The system doesn't have a word count tracker, and we do ask you to keep your narrative responses under a certain word count. And so doing them in Word helps with that. Project budget. So I'm going to spend the next few slides talking about project budget for a little bit. So for a project budget, it's a balance of showing sufficient items to show your major work elements, but not being too detailed that we have to know the cost of every nut and bolt. We're just trying to capture the major project elements. We also don't want to see contingency as a line item. If we do, we're going to kick that back to you to edit. If you do have a contingency in your budget that an engineer's prepared, spread that percentage over your existing grant items. We will not allow contingency as a budget item. I'm also recommending that if you know your project's not going to start construction for a year, like if you're still midway through your design process and you still need to get through it, you're building your budget now. The grant program closes in June. Construction may not occur for another year. Build inflation into your budget. We want to make sure you have enough money to complete the project successfully. So just building in an inflation rate is a very healthy way to make sure you're getting enough money to complete your project. This next bullet point, this is a big one. Design and engineering is limited to 15% of the total project cost. That may not cover all of your design and engineering, and that's because this project is really intended to be a shovel-ready program where you've completed design and engineering already or have already gotten through most of it. That may not always be the case, but 15% is a hard cap for design and engineering costs. As I mentioned, pre-agreement costs are allowed, but they have to be identified in your grant budget application, and there are limitations, so just make sure you're referring to the grant manual if you are including pre-agreement costs. Just read the section on pre-agreement costs in the grant manual or contact me if you have questions. Okay, so the image on the right is a good example of what we want to see in terms of detail. Notice that there are some items that are combined. We don't see insurance, bonding, mobilization all as separate line items. They've been combined for clarity, but it's still detailed enough that we know what that line item is for. And then also note they've got their pre-award costs listed at the bottom there. It's identified as a pre-award cost or a pre-agreement cost. And then just one other note, don't list expenses paid outside of the grant or match. So for example, your time spent preparing the grant application or completing progress reports, those are not eligible as match or for reimbursement because those activities are not attributed directly to project implementation. So don't include those in your budget. Okay, so this is what the budget worksheet looks like in the online application. Again, I'm going to do a plug to this online grant application instructions for more details about how to fill out this project budget worksheet, or contact me if you're having any issues. So this is an example of what a budget might look like. We want to see all of the different project elements in the top, and only the match should only be at the bottom in the source of funding. You can also see here the different categories that we talked about. So lumping certain items together into distinct categories can help with having detail, but not overly complicated budgets. And you can also see they've identified their architectural and engineering costs as a pre-award or a pre-agreement cost at the top. And it's $97,000, which is just 8% of the total project budget. So we're fine. It's under 15%, which is the cap. And then just note that the top section here autofills. So as you insert your items into this project budget worksheet, both the top and the bottom will autofill. And you can always edit, but if you've inputted something incorrectly, you can edit with the little pencil icon or delete it with the X and redo it. But yeah, just refer to these instructions for more details about how to insert your budget. Okay, so after the application deadline, you've submitted it. Staff will conduct a technical review of each application. There's no points awarded during this process, but this allows us to focus on eligibility and completeness of your application. We will follow up with you as part of technical review. And so applications are due in June. So you'll hear from us June through August for technical review, and we'll provide the opportunity to reopen your application and fix anything that needs to be corrected during this technical review process. So again, we're not editing your application. We're focusing on completeness. So do you have all of your required attachments? Are all of your different project elements eligible for funding? Are you, as an agency, compliant with your other OPRD grants? Are there any active projects that are off track, or are they on track? And then also there are cases where there's instances of non-compliance that could be cause for denial of an application, or special conditions might be placed on the award. For example, closing something out or moving something forward before we'll issue your award. So ultimately, technical review is your application ready to go to the advisory committee? So the advisory committee, this is our grant review board. It's composed of 10 members who represent the following categories. So it's just trying to get at a well dispersed group. We are currently recruiting. So the members in red here, we're currently recruiting members for our advisory committee. So if you're interested, if you represent a city under 15,000 people, or you are representing a historically underrepresented community, and you are a recreation professional or a private citizen with interest and background in outdoor recreation, click this link to learn more and apply. If you are interested, act quickly. We've had this recruitment open all of March, and we're hoping to close it April 1st. So if you're interested in scoring applications, just a little plug there. So these 10 members will review your application via Zoom in late September or early October for this cycle, and they will also hear presentations for large grant requests. So large grant requests is anything greater than 100,000 in request. And you as an agency will have 20 minutes to make the presentation. And we recommend leaving about half of that time for questions for the committee itself. And at this meeting, the committee members will establish a priority list for funding. And by the time you're presenting in front of this group, the committee members will already have reviewed each application. And PowerPoint's typically what people use to present. And we also ask that you send your PowerPoint presentation to us in a PDF 1 week before the presentation meeting. So plan on preparing a presentation and having that ready by mid-September or so. There's no project presentations for small grants, so anything under 100,000, and then all of our planning grants do not trigger a presentation. So those applications are reviewed and scored by a separate OPRD committee, separate from the advisory committee. So you'll be contacted if you're funded separately for that for either of these categories. So this is a slide that's made its way into our presentations. If you're using AI, please proceed with caution. OPRD does not use AI to screen or evaluate applications. And while it could be helpful for you writing or proofreading, we have observed some pitfalls. We've observed that there can be just objectively inaccurate responses to some of these questions, or we also see responses that don't answer the question or only redefine the question. We see answers that are sometimes buried in the response, or even we see an AI tool that can be pasted in the response that you haven't proofread out. And just in general, there's inaccurate information about your jurisdiction, about your scope, about what accessible design is, etc. So if you use AI, proofread, please. Respect your community, submit an accurate application, and also just respect the time of our committee members who are volunteering their time to review your applications. Okay, so grantee responsibilities. So if you're so lucky and you get one of our grants, please do not start your work until a notice to proceed, or you might hear us refer to them as an NTP letter, is received. And that project work includes incurring any expenses except for pre-agreement, which we've talked about. So that means don't order your playground equipment until you've received your NTP letter. It isn't just construction that counts as project work. It's any expenses, unless, of course, they're identified as pre-agreement, which we've talked about. Grantee responsibilities continued. So quarterly progress reports are expected, and that's all done through our OPRD grant system, same system you're using to submit your application. And these progress reports are simple. It's just asking for a project update. Yeah, they're not overly complicated, so it's not a big burden to submit these, we don't think. Accurate record keeping. I recommend assigning a project code for easier tracking. That way you can just run a report, see all of the project's expenses related to that report. That helps a lot on your end and our end. Track your staff time that you're using as match. Track your volunteer timesheets, any volunteer labor, any donated materials and supplies or donated equipment. It's worth mentioning that we do have forms for these on our website if you want to use our form. If you don't use our form and you have some other way of tracking, just make sure the same information is in your form. If you're wanting to use a spreadsheet, for example, make sure it includes all of the information that our template forms have. Requests for reimbursements include all copies of your project invoices and bills. That's an obvious one. Maybe less obvious, we also need confirmation that those bills and invoices have indeed been paid. So we see that either through an accounts payable report, or we could see copies of your canceled payment checks. But just a note that if you use the check method, please block out your account numbers. We can't save sensitive financial information in our grant system. And so that might be kicked back to you if those account numbers aren't blocked out. And then lastly, this is a big one. We cannot approve a request for reimbursement that does not include the minimum grantee match participation rate. Or in other words, the minimum match percentage has to be met for all requests for reimbursement. And that can be overall, or that can be for each individual request. It's up to you, but we'll need to see grantee match participation in every reimbursement. Oh, and one other note, local government grant program holds a 10% retainage from the final reimbursement until your project is completed and you've met all of the final closeout requirements. So just keep that in mind. So you will typically have 2 years to complete your project. We do allow amendments or extensions, but they're not guaranteed. So we want to see project progress. Ooh, can't speak. Before we'll grant an amendment or an extension on time, we want to see what progress you've made. As I mentioned, development and rehab projects have to be dedicated towards parks and recreation purposes for a minimum of 25 years. That timeline is very important. Acquisition projects, on the other hand, have to be dedicated in perpetuity. So if you acquire a property with our funding, there's a notice of grant that gets recorded on the deed with the county that says this project or this property is funded with a grant and has to maintain recreation purposes in perpetuity. So conversion process, this is the act of converting an LGGP funded property or facility out of public outdoor recreation use. Converted property has to be replaced. And so lastly, just a note about how long these projects can sometimes last. You know, you don't always know that, you know, if you're the one applying for the grant, you don't always know that you're not going to be with the agency years down the road. But before you leave, please plan for staff transitions, hand things off so they know where a project is left off. It's really unfortunate when we see projects that are forgotten about because the person who applied is no longer with the jurisdiction. So please try to plan for that. Okay, project completion. So as part of your project completion, you will submit a final report. That includes your final progress report and your final reimbursement request. You will submit photos of the completed work, and we'll be looking to see that those photos include all of the project elements listed in your budget and in your grant contract. And if needed, we want to see an updated site plan. So if the work was completed as planned in your site plan. You'll just update that site plan. If it says proposed, you'll say completed on the site plan. So we'll want to see that as well. And this is, again, all submitted on oprdgrants.org. We might arrange a final site visit with either myself as the grant coordinator or other OPRD staff if they're in the area and a project is closed out. We may coordinate that with you. Publicity, we will expect you to post a sign acknowledging the grant funds being used on the project site, and we'll want a photo of that as part of your photos to complete the work. We have signs that we can send out for free. They're just 8x8 signs that look like the photo on the upper right. Or if you have some other way of showing acknowledgement, like the picture in the bottom right, you can also just send us a picture of that. You don't have to use our sign to acknowledge our funding. And then lastly, just notify me if you have a grand opening or a ribbon cutting. We love to attend those if we can. It may not be me as the coordinator, it might be someone else with OPRD staff, but please invite us to your celebrations. And as promised, here are all the links that I've referenced to the LGGP website, our grant manual, the online grant website, oprdgrants.org, and then, of course, my contact information is listed here. And with that, I can open it up for questions.
Great. Thanks, Jenny. Just a couple questions. So folks have more, keep them coming. One person is asking, does anyone have good suggestions on what programs or how to make these maps? Thinking about like site plan and park boundary map. This person said, I don't have mapping software and it's been taking a lot of time. So I think Jenny might have some insight, but also if you're in that position, I encourage you to check with your peers, your communities that you're neighboring or within, and see what they use, because you all do this all the time where us grant coordinators don't, except for Jenny, who did when she was at a city. So Jenny.
Yeah, Lori, I would check your, I don't know if you're a city or county, but often there's GIS web maps that your county provides just for property records, and you might be able to use that as a good starting place. And I'm happy to chat with you offline about maybe those resources that you may not be aware of. But there might be good some suggestions I have. And talk to your peers, like Jody recommended.
Yeah. Great. And I just think somebody already sent in a suggestion. I popped that in the chat. And yeah, if anybody else has something you want to add, feel free to do that. This other one, I probably just could answer this in the chat, but they're asking, do you need a phase 1 ESA or environmental? Oh my goodness, I'm forgetting what that S stands for. Environmental assessment. But I think the answer to that is just, it depends. We don't have a grant requirement that says everybody needs to have a phase 1 ESA done. But that might be something that's very relevant to your project. So that would just be considered in the whole readiness to proceed piece. Anything to add, Jenny?
No, I think that's fair. It depends on the project. The
Mhm.
answer is probably no, but maybe
Mhm.
yes.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. If you're in
Good
depending
answer.
on the area you're in. Yeah. Michelle?
Yeah, I agree with that answer. It's very project dependent, but
Mhm.
it's not a requirement for every project.
Great, thank you. And then another one, somebody asked about if conservation easements are eligible. I'm assuming, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the person who sent that in, that you're talking about acquiring an easement with local government. But I also just want to note, we have seen that come up as far as easements in place on a park property, and that's something we want to look at. I have seen some issues where there's a conservation easement that actually restricts recreation in an area. So that's something to take into account. But anything to add, Michelle or Jenny, just on conservation easements in general, as far as acquisition or otherwise?
Yeah, yes, I believe you're on the right track there. If it is an acquisition of the
Mhm.
easement, or
Mhm.
actually any, um, yeah, you just need to make sure that if it is to protect natural resources, it does still need to permit recreational
Mhm.
activities, and that needs to be very clear because that is the purpose of this grant program is
Mhm.
recreation. So and you're right, that is something we need to look closely
Mhm.
at. Also, if you're receiving a grant, say from OWEB, where their main mission is
Mhm.
conservation, you're right, those can be in conflict. So we need to be really
Mhm.
careful to make sure that anything involved with these grants isn't going to restrict recreational activities.
Yeah. And I should
I
clarify too, the one example I'm thinking of, it was they actually were proposing development within the easement area, and it turned out that wasn't allowed per the easement. But if you have an easement in a pocket of the park and there might be like bird watching or whatever may be happening, that could be totally fine. So it would depend.
Yeah, and I would just add there's
Mhm.
also not just the uses that you talked about, but
Mhm.
there's the duration of time requirement.
Yeah.
So I would want to check the easement language to make sure that it's at least 25 years, and that if the property ownership changes or something like that, like I
Mhm.
would want to know that it doesn't just get extinguished if the property owner changes or something like that. There's a time component too.
Great point. Thanks, Jenny. And I don't see any other questions coming in. I'm gonna give folks a little time just to think of any questions and pop them in, and also take advantage of this moment to say, I know I owe email replies to some of you in the audience today, and we are in a staff transition time, and I am catching up, and feel free to ping Jenny and I if if you have not heard from me on something you need to hear from me or Jenny on. Okay, great. Questions. Or go ahead, Jenny. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, yes, the slides will be shared.
Mm.
I'm going to upload the slides as soon as I can to our website because I can control that. But outside of my control is how quickly the actual recorded webinar gets uploaded. I'm hoping within a week to have a link to that, this recording itself. And I will email all registrants when that recording is ready. So
Great.
the slides and record, yeah, thank you, Jody. Perfect. So they'll be posted there, but you'll also get an email notification once I've
Mhm.
uploaded the recording.
Great. And we have a couple more questions. Thank you, folks. I'll give this one to you, Jenny. Can you apply for I'm guessing the planning grant and a large grant this year? How does that work if you got multiple project ideas?
Yeah, if you have no open grants, you can apply for two.
Mm-hmm. Yep, because otherwise you can only have two active projects at a time. And if maybe you have two and one of them is nearing completion, that'd be something we'd need that to be completed during the process, but Jenny can look at it closer with you. Oh, good. More and more. My city is working on a public fishing pier project, but the exact location hasn't been finalized. It could be within a designated park near our marina or in an adjacent public area. Does the project need to be located specifically within a defined park area to be eligible, or would a public access waterfront location still potentially qualify? And I'm gonna initially say that this probably depends, and Jenny will probably need more information.
Yeah, so who
Yeah.
owns it if it's not the agency that's applying is my question.
Mhm.
So if is it an easement with
Mhm.
DSL? Is it a marine easement? Like what's the actual
Mhm.
ownership situation?
Yeah.
And I would say, does it need to be defined in order to qualify? Yes, ownership is a
Mhm.
huge deal. And so if you're still debating between locations, you would need to figure that out before application because it determines eligibility.
Mhm. Great. And Lori, I see your chat and I'm saving your contact info for Jenny so she can follow up with you. Thank you. For the mandatory state agency review forms, you noted that sending to DSL, ODFW, and DEQ is required, but on the special requirements in the manual, it says, oh, this is a great point. This is the nuance. It says that consultation is not needed for ODFW if there is no ground disturbance. And yes, there is some nuance to some of those, and those have been things like ODFW requested that from us, that we add that to our guidance. So there is more nuance as you go through that list of required agencies to contact. Anything else to add on that, Jenny?
Yeah, we try to get
Mhm.
at that with the acquisitions and planning grants, not
Mhm.
requiring state agency review
Yeah.
forms too. And so typically if you're
Hmm.
applying, it's a development grant that has ground
Yep.
disturbance. So we sort of make
Mhm.
those broader generalizations. You know, we'd rather have you
Mhm.
over contact than under contact.
Yep.
So
Yep.
Susie, if you have a specific project that
Mhm.
isn't a planning grant or an acquisition grant, but doesn't have ground disturbance, I would just want to chat with you
Yep.
about what specifically your project is.
Yeah, and I think that has come up with some of those, like if you're maybe like replacing the roof on a picnic shelter or bathroom or something really big
Hmm.
like that, but
Right.
really not touching the ground. So we can look at that. Oh, and the question, their answer about the fishing pier, they said it would be on the agency property or public right of way. So I think, yeah, that probably needs to just be looked at a little closer with Jenny.
Yep. Yeah.
Travis, if the project splits the UGB, should we use dispersed, close to home, or both? The majority of their project is in the UGB, and that is a great question that we get.
Yeah, that's a great, yeah. And I would say it's usually more beneficial if you're using the priorities within the UGB. If you're finding that you would rather use dispersed, we can talk about that. But if most of your project is within the UGB, it's probably more beneficial for you to use close to home.
Yeah, yeah. And we've had some like that too, where it's the mostly outside of the UGB, but still touching it. And there's some case by caseness there.
But you should
Uh,
stick to one.
yes,
Yep,
yes,
yep.
thank you. Not do
Thank you,
both.
Michelle.
Thank
Yeah,
you. Yeah.
don't get,
Because you are essentially going through like check boxes and drop downs for either close to home or disperse, so you can't actually on some of those answers click more than one. So just sounds like close to home it is for yours, Corvallis. I don't see any more. Just lots of thank yous to Jenny and agreed. Cool. Yeah, we can give it another count to 10-ish. And nothing more that I see.
Sarah, does that mean you're typing a question? Sarah says one more.
Oh, yes.
But
Keep them. Yeah, we're here.
did I miss one, Sarah?
Or she just wants you to redo one more time. Kidding.
Okay. Oh, speak to the competitiveness.
Great question.
You know, that's something I thought about including a slide on is how what percentage of projects have been funded in the past. And I believe that calculation's been done, but I don't know it
Yeah.
offhand. Um,
I casually say about half-ish when it comes to the large grant side, although I think maybe the last couple of years we've been able to fund a little more than half. And then the small grant is much less competitive, and the planning grant is very, very little competition. Michelle, do you have
yeah,
anything?
I think that's true. I think
Mhm.
almost every planning grant has gotten funded. Maybe
Yeah,
one or two did not. And then the smalls, I think, are about the same.
yeah. But yeah, it is competitive. We have like our RT, it's similar, our RTP program for folks who've applied, the Trails Grant, that's also competitive. And I like to say they're a little similar. And there will, if you don't get funded this try, you can always come back again. We have funded some projects on the second or third try. So I know that can be discouraging. But you've done a lot of work. And if you don't make the funding cut, you can absolutely come back and there may be some opportunity too for feedback, just from any comments the committee shared or that Jenny might have if you're not funded.
Yeah, and I just want to add, I think a good way to see if your particular project is, if you think it's going to be competitive, is just really look at what Jenny went over with you today. She did an excellent job of talking about the criteria. And, doesn't mean you shouldn't apply if you think, oh, I'm not going to get all of these points, but it'll give you kind of an idea of competitiveness. Um, I think I would encourage you to talk to Jenny as you develop your project if you're concerned about eligibility, and definitely during technical review, you'll be contacted if it's not eligible, and there may be some comments about competitiveness in that case too, where it's eligible, but like I don't know that this is the best fit, and that's where like Jenny had mentioned some of our other programs. Sometimes we'll say this would be a better fit, say for RTP or something else. But I think you can kind of test that out yourself
Yeah.
by looking at those criteria.
And every year there are great projects that unfortunately we just don't have enough money for. So just if you're not funded, it doesn't always mean it wasn't a great proposal, but there can always be room for improvement potentially.
Okay, well, I don't think we're seeing any more questions here. Thanks for everyone's questions. I think that they're actually really helpful for other people to hear similar questions and answers, or they might have triggered other questions. So thanks for everyone for being interactive and participating in this webinar. We really appreciate your interest in this program, and we hope you apply and are successful. With that, I think we will end it.
Great.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.